Hey Maroons, for college algebra section 9.2, transformation of graphs, we're going to look at our first math lab. Awesome, right? I've made this short video to help you learn GeoGebra. And so what you need to do is go to GeoGebra and let me share my screen with you and show you what's going on. So we have this assignment. This assignment is going to walk you through looking at the transformation of functions using what we're going to define as parent functions. Parent functions are the basic graphs that we will look at the rest of this semester and then in pre-calc and calculus next year. To do that, we're going to pull up GeoGebra. So I want to walk you through this. We'll need a GeoGebra screen. So I'm going to pull up a new screen here, and we're going to just type in GeoGebra. Now, when you log into GeoGebra the first time, it's going to ask you to log in. Just go ahead and log in with your Google login. You don't need to create a new password. Just use your Google and go right in. We're going to go ahead and start graphing, which is start calculator. And we're going to pull up this screen. Now, the neat thing about GeoGebra, it allows us to graph functions. Let's go back to our worksheet and see what we're supposed to do. We're going to use some parameters. So in the input box at the left, type in each constant letter that will be used in the function A, H, and K to create a slider button. So let's look at that first. So I'm going to put in the letter A, and I'm going to hit enter. And that creates this slider button. And what that allows me to do is change the value A from whatever this thing says, from -5 to +5. If you wanted to, you can change this. You can change it from 10 to -10, 100 to -100, whatever you want it to be. We're just going to use 5 and 5. We also need the value H and the value K. And again, just hitting those letters, we can put in parameters. I'm going to go ahead and try and put A back to 1. And then I'm going to put H and K at 0. Or at least as close to 0 as I can get. All right, then let's go back to our activity. We're going to look at the constant function, y equals k. And so we'll walk through the first couple of these together to get you started. Then I'll show you how to do some of the more complex ones. So for y equals k, we're just going to put in y equals k. And that's going to graph the line, y equals k. Now k is whatever value we want our slider to be. Now, the interesting thing is going to be what happens. And now note, you can move all this stuff around. You can grab the screen and move around. You can actually zoom in and out if you want to, different things. But move, so I've used y equals k. So let's look at our slider button and move the k. The thing we want to look at is what happens to our graph if k moves. Well, k appears to move the graph up and down. So in our activity, we would sketch a graph of what y equals k looks like. So put a little sketch of a graph here. And then what happens when k is changed, right? It's going to shift the graph up and down. We're just going to continue that process looking at all of these different parameters. You can either reset each time with a new GeoGebra page, or you can just keep using the same page. You can actually, if you click this little gray button over here, it'll actually hide the graph. So the next one, if we look at y equals ax plus k, right? There's our linear equation. Again, we can experiment with what happens. If we move k, what do we see? Well, it looks like it's moving diagonal, but it's actually not moving diagonal. It's actually moving up and down. But because of the way your brain works, it looks like it's moving diagonal. But it is moving up and down. Then we can also see what happens if we move a. Well, there's our slope. Right? The steeper it gets, the steeper the line gets. As we get to 0, it gets flat. When we switch to negative, it goes the other direction. There's our slope. The other fun thing, there's a bunch of things you can do to play with this stuff. There's a little play button here, so you can actually play it and it'll go. You can change the speed. There's a bunch of fun, kind of zany things you can do with this. So we're just going to work our way through this worksheet, typing in everything you need to do. Now, there's a couple funky ones. So we're going to look at the parabola. We studied the parabola, see what happens there. We're going to look at the cubic function, see what happens there. The square root function, now how are we going to do square root? Let's talk about how we might do that one. So let's go back to GeoGebra. So I'm going to hide this one. So how do we do square root? Well, there's a couple ways to do that. So if I do y equals a, and then if I pull the keyboard back, there's a little keyboard in the little corner. There is the square root right there. So y equals a square root. I got to click it here. Oh, got two of them. Y equals a square root. And I'm going to do parentheses. X minus h. And then I want to go make sure I arrow outside of the square root and then put plus k. So the line above the square root should just be above the x minus h and the k. So that's how we do that one. And then again, we're going to look at the graph and see what happens. Interesting. Write down what happens if you move k. We haven't looked at h yet. What happens when you move h? Well, that's interesting. And then what happens if it's not a linear function and we move a? Interesting. Write down what you think is happening and then turn that in. The other one that's a little bit difficult is absolute value. Absolute value, again, if we look at that one, if I remember correctly, that's maybe in our, if we hit that keyboard thing, again, there's absolute value, so you can use the absolute value function. The other one that's difficult is the greatest integer function, which we won't actually look at until we get to college algebra. But let's talk about how to do that. We're going to type in all of this stuff. So a times floor, x minus h plus k. This is just an interesting function that we can look at. Didn't want to show that. We want to type in, so floor function. So y equals a, we'll do times. And then we want to type in the word floor. And up on the screen is going to pop this little phrase floor. This is in the library. There's a whole bunch of functions that aren't included on the keyboard that we can include in the library. So there's our floor. We're going to type in, we're going to get rid of the middle stuff and type in x minus h, and then type in plus k. Now, we're not really worried about what that graph is. Again, we just want to look at what do the parameters do. What does a, h, and k do to the graph? And what you'll notice, hopefully, is it's very similar in all of these graphs, what the parameters a, h, and k do. So play with that, and again, go back and play with the sliders and see what happens to the graph as you move h and k. And then write all that on your worksheet. If you're a remote student, take a picture of that and turn it in. Otherwise, we're going to do this in class. Have a good day, Maroons.